Welcome back. Over 1,600 more people have died from COVID-19 in the US as the country's death toll crosses 87,000. The global COVID-19 death count has crossed 307,000 with over 4.5 million infections. Spain has recorded its lowest daily COVID-19 related death toll in 2 months with 102 fatalities. Meanwhile, in neighboring Italy, the government plans on relaxing travel restrictions from 3rd June as the government gears up on the easing coronavirus lockdown. More in this report.
The coronavirus pandemic has put all countries around the globe in an economic depression. President Donald Trump has promised the U.S. will reopen its economy whether there is a vaccine or not. Meanwhile, the U.S. House of Representatives has approved a $3 trillion bill to provide more aid for battling the pandemic. Trump has vowed to block the bill, while House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said the far-reaching legislation will help local governments and others reeling from the pandemic.
Losing a loved one, it doesn't take a pause. So many lives may have been saved if we had testing and tracing and treatment earlier on. And now that's a lesson to us that that's what we must do so that we can end this. But we don't end it by pausing in the fight.
The European Union has proposed its next long-term budget to kickstart growth on the continent headed for its worst ever economic downturn. The bloc is negotiating on how much of the proposed recovery fund should be handed out as grants to member states and how much in loans. Meanwhile, an EU study reveals the pandemic has placed unprecedented strain on families and working life. The UK says the increased percentage of people working from home can help implement social distancing rules.
And that shows that 44% of employed adults are actually working from home compared to 12% last year. This is a change in habit, and we're expecting that people will maintain that and advising that they should. And it's probably going to be a successful way forward for us to control many of the social distancing measures over the next few months.
Mainland China has reported 8 new coronavirus cases, of which 6 are imported, while 2 locally transmitted.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, almost 11,000 patients have recovered from COVID-19. The health ministry says the country's coronavirus death toll has reached 834 after 31 died overnight. The ministry reported over 1,581 infection cases in the last 24 hours, bringing the total to nearly 39,000. It said nearly 14,900 tests have been conducted overnight, taking total to nearly 360,000. Meanwhile, Pakistan's Economic Coordination Committee has approved the emergency cash assistance to the labor amid pandemic. Pakistan says Indian and Israel's illegal occupation and brutality continue in occupied Kashmir and Palestine. In a tweet, Foreign Minister Shah Mehmood Qureshi urged the world community to act immediately over these issues. Qureshi said both longest-standing conflicts have been on the UN and Organization of Islamic Cooperation's agenda. The Foreign Minister said oppressive policy in Palestine and occupied Kashmir are to alter the demographic structure. He also said these unresolved crises are promoting fear and causing human rights violations. Occupied Kashmir has been under India's curfew for the last 285 days. Meanwhile, Pakistan has rejected Indian Army Chief's recent comments, leveling allegations against Pakistan and hurling threats. Foreign Office spokesperson Aisha Farooqi said these are part of India's desperate attempts to divert the world's attention from India's state terrorism in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. To stop Israel from annexing parts of the occupied West Bank, the European Union says it will make a diplomatic push. During a bloc's meeting, EU's Foreign Minister Josep Borrell said the prospect of annexation violates international law. Borrell said the bloc will prevent Israel's incoming unity government from going ahead with the move that harms the chances of peace. He said the EU's diplomacy will involve talking to the US and Arab countries, as well as Israel and the Palestinians. Germany's Foreign Minister Heiko Maas said the EU is committed to the goal of a negotiated two-state solution. In a related development, Jordan has warned Israel of a massive conflict if it goes ahead with the annexation plans of the occupied West Bank. In an interview, King Abdullah II said there will be more chaos and extremism in the region if the Palestinian Authority collapses. The king said Jordan agrees with many European countries that the law of strength should not apply in the Middle East. He said the two-state solution is the only way to be able to move forward. Washington's plan, which favors Israel and was rejected by the Palestinians, gave a green light to annexation. Meanwhile, Israeli security forces fired tear gas shells on Palestinian protesters in the West Bank, injuring 5. In another news, 2 Iraqi soldiers have been killed in an ISIS attack in northern province of Salatin. The attack comes a day after 3 people were killed in 2 separate terror attacks by the ISIS in Iraq's eastern Diyala province. Talking to media, a provincial security official said terrorists attacked a control point in Dujail district of the province. The official said the attackers quickly fled after the ambush, but an operation has begun to apprehend them. ISIS captured Mosul, Saladin, Anbar provinces and certain portions of Diyala and Kirkuk in June 2014, which were gradually taken back by Iraq. Iran has sentenced a French-Iranian academic to 6 years in prison on national security charges. Fariba Adel-Khair, a specialist in Shiite Islam and a research director at Sciences Po University in Paris, was arrested in June last year. Talking to media, her lawyer said Adel-Khair is sentenced to 5 years for gathering and conspiring against national security. The lawyer said 1 year of jail has been given to the academic for propaganda against the Islamic Republic. He said his client is only to be expected to serve the 5-year jail term, which he intends to appeal. Adel-Khair's trial started on March 3rd, with the last hearing held on April 19th at Branch 15 of Tehran's Revolutionary Court. Yemen's government claims Houthi rebels have seized medical equipment aid by World Health Organization. In a statement, Information Minister Muhammad Al-Eriani said the WHO sent the medical goods and aid to hospitals in the regions. The minister said rebels seized the equipment in order to send them to their own supporters. He asked the UN to condemn the move by Houthis and demanded the group be enforced to send medical supplies back to the hospitals. Meanwhile, the government says it is trying to figure out a disease of an unknown origin, which has killed hundreds of people in current month in Aden. Officials say the mysterious outbreak can possibly be lung plague or chikungunya fever, which is spread through mosquitoes. Turkey has criticized the EU over its Eastern Mediterranean statement, saying it is the last example of a fruitless discourse. In a statement, Turkish Foreign Ministry spokesperson Hami Aksoy said the European Union's declaration serves no purpose. Aksoy said the approach encircled by Greece's illegitimate claims is not contributing to regional peace and stability. He said it is interesting, EU could not show unity over COVID-19, but doing it unconditionally when it is about Greek Cyprus. He said the bloc should act in line with Turkey and the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus' legitimate rights and international law. Earlier, the bloc's foreign ministers published a declaration urging Turkey to respect EU countries' maritime jurisdiction and sovereignty in territorial waters. U.S. Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad says a new date for intra-Afghan peace talks is under discussion. Talking to media, the envoy said the U.S. has heard positive reports about the formation of an inclusive Afghan government. Khalilzad said it will be the best if intra-Afghan talks begin while there is still a significant U.S. military presence in Afghanistan. The envoy said he will soon travel to push for a de-escalation in violence and the release of prisoners. Discussing recent attacks in Afghanistan, he said there are forces such as ISIS that do not want to see peace in the country. Meanwhile, the Pentagon said the U.S. is continuing its drawdown of troops from Afghanistan and is expected to meet a timeline agreed with the Taliban. The United States officials say they will reduce to 8,600 troops by July 15th and abandon 5 bases. Pentagon says it is too early to resume all military exercises between South Korea and the U.S. due to the coronavirus pandemic. Pentagon spokesperson Jonathan Hoffman said the outbreak needs to be controlled before the full resumption of the exercises. Hoffman said the USFK command had continued to carry out maneuvering and conduct tabletop exercises. U.S. Forces Korea Command said it is maintaining restrictions on service members' off-post activities following an increase in new infections in the country. The allies had postponed their springtime combined military exercises scheduled for March amid the COVID-19 threat in South Korea. On the situation in North Korea, the spokesperson questioned Pyongyang's claims of zero confirmed cases. In India, the number of COVID-19 cases has risen to nearly 86,000, exceeding China's infections. The cases soared in India despite a strict lockdown enforced since late March by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The officials said a third of the infections are from the western state of Maharashtra, with Mumbai worst hit, followed by Tamil Nadu, Gujarat and Delhi. Experts said India is in the growth phase since new infections are still rising and active cases are growing at 3.8% rate daily. They said this needs to fall to 0% subsequently for the country to recover overall. The authorities have reported over 2,700 fatalities across the country so far. 24 migrants have died and dozens others were injured in a road accident in India's northern state of Uttar Pradesh. Police said the accident occurred after the laborers' truck collided with another vehicle in Auraiya district. Talking to media, police said most of the migrant workers are from Bihar, Jharkhand and West Bengal states. The local doctor said 22 people have been admitted to the hospital, among which 15 are in critical condition. Meanwhile, hundreds of migrants are seen walking through River Yamuna in Haryana to reach their homes in Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. The workers, many carrying their children on heads, have decided to cross the river as many interstate borders are sealed. We're taking a short break, but stay tuned for more news. Welcome back. Nigeria says its armed forces have killed 61 members of Boko Haram in the country's northeast over the past week. In a statement, the Defense Ministry said it carried out operations against Boko Haram in Adamawa state. The ministry said 11 terrorists have surrendered, while a huge cache of ammunition belonging to the group was seized. It said a total of 603 terrorists have been in a rehabilitation program after surrendering to the government. Boko Haram launched an insurgency in 2009 in northeastern Nigeria, prompting a military response. The UN says more than 30,000 people have been killed and nearly 3 million displaced in a decade of Boko Haram's terrorist activities. The UN says fewer children are getting vaccinated in Congo, and the COVID-19 pandemic is almost certainly going to make matters worse. In a statement, the UN Children's Fund said if the trend continues, diseases such as polio, chickenpox and measles can resurge. It said children's lives are at stake as COVID-19 restrictions hamper the delivery of vaccines that are already in short supply. The UNICEF says Congo risks losing its polio-free certification and measles and yellow fever can return to epidemic levels. The body urged the government of DRC to launch catch-up campaigns and intensify immunization efforts to reach all children with vaccines. It has also called on international donors to step up their multi-year contributions to the effort. Colombia has once again refuted accusations of preparing an invasion of mercenaries on Venezuela. In an interview, Defense Minister Carlos Trujillo termed the allegations baseless, saying Bogota's position regarding Caracas is clear. Trujillo said Colombia is using all of institutional mechanisms to create conditions for political changes in its neighboring country. Earlier, Venezuela arrested 21 people after an alleged coup attempt. On May 3rd, another maritime attempt allegedly involving Colombian vessels was foiled. Maduro has accused the US, Colombia and opposition leader Juan Guaido of coordinating the failed attacks. Brazil has reported record 15,305 COVID-19 cases in 24 hours along with 824 deaths. Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro is under intense pressure after downplaying the outbreak, asking citizens to ignore quarantine restrictions. Brazil's Health Minister Nelson Taix has resigned from his position less than a month after being appointed. Meanwhile, Colombia says it is collaborating with hard-hit Brazil in an effort to fight an increasing number of coronavirus cases. President Ivan Duque said a series of measures was agreed during a virtual meeting between Colombian and Brazilian officials. Brazil has reported over 220,000 infections and nearly 15,000 deaths so far. The Amnesty International says governments in Latin America have repressed civil liberties to implement COVID-19 lockdown measures. In a statement, Amnesty's America's director, Enrique Guevara Rosas, said the group has verified nearly 60 such incidents in the region over the past 7 weeks. Guevara Rosas said governments are using arbitrary, punitive and repressive tactics to enforce quarantine orders. She said mass detentions, unnecessary use of force and food shortages during lockdowns infringe the basic rights of the citizens. The rights group said security forces have repressed many demonstrations across the region by using tear gas and firearms against protesters. The Amnesty warns such measures violate human rights and repression will ultimately be ineffective in containing the spread of the disease. In Mexico, a local parlor organized a drive-through funeral for a victim of coronavirus. Dozens of people in their cars made their way past the casket to pay their homage to the deceased in the northern city of Ciudad del Juarez. More about this unique funeral in this report.
A heartbroken family said a unique goodbye to their loved one. The drive-through funeral was carried out next to a cemetery with the consent of local health authorities. The coffin was placed under a tent and a path that cars could follow to get a view. In a 2-hour service, friends and family offered their condolences to relatives of the deceased from their cars to avoid contagion.
I think it's good we were given the opportunity to be at least a few minutes next to his coffin, next to his body. And I think it's good to avoid contagion so that people have the opportunity to say goodbye to their loved ones.
The funeral was held for Sergio Bertado Rodriguez, a 51-year-old healthcare worker at a local clinic. He transported patients with COVID-19 in ambulances until he became infected and succumbed to the disease.
Give the families an option to hold a vigil for relatives. This is a drive-through vigil where vehicles are passing by and giving their condolences quickly to their relatives and friends, to the family of deceased.
According to the official tally, there are over 45,000 confirmed coronavirus cases and nearly 4,800 deaths in Mexico.
President Donald Trump says the USA is working with other countries to develop a vaccine for coronavirus. Talking to reporters at the White House, the president said Washington is also preparing for the vaccine's distribution once it is ready. Trump said a list of 14 promising potential vaccines have been made, which will be narrowed further. Answering media questions, Trump said he is considering making the vaccine available free of charge.
We're looking at that actually, but we're making a lot of progress on vaccines. But we'll be speaking to you very soon, and I think we're going to have a very good couple of meetings at Camp David. Thank you.
Meanwhile, the World Health Organization said COVID-19 pandemic can only be beaten with equitable distribution of medicines and vaccines. Now, China has called on UN member states to fulfill their financial obligations, saying the US owes the organization more than $2 billion. In a statement, Beijing said Washington owes $1.165 billion under the UN regular budget and $1.33 billion for peacekeeping budget. The US mission to the UN dismissed the call, saying China is eager to distract attention from its cover-up and mismanagement of the COVID-19 crisis. In a report on May 11th, UN Chief Antonio Guterres warned there may be significant delay in payments of peacekeeping operations around the world. On Thursday, 50 of the 193 member states, including China, paid their contributions in full. The US is the biggest contributor to the UN budget, paying 22% of its annual running costs and 25% of its peacekeeping operations. China has asked the US to stop the unreasonable suppression of Huawei and Chinese enterprises. This comes after Washington announced new export controls to restrict the tech giant's access to semiconductor technology. In a statement, the Foreign Ministry said Beijing will firmly uphold Chinese firms' legitimate and legal rights and interests. The ministry said the Trump administration's actions are destroying global manufacturing supply and value chains. The new restrictions will cut off Huawei's access to one of its major suppliers, the Taiwanese chipmaker. Meanwhile, White House advisor Larry Kudlow said the US-China Phase 1 trade deal is not falling apart and the two countries are working to implement it. LATAM Airlines Group is set to lay off 1,400 employees. That is about 3% of the company's workforce. In a statement, airline CEO Roberto Alvo said the board has no option but to downsize the company. LATAM has already halved the wages of its 43,000 employees, and now it has become the first airline in the region to announce layoffs. But there are several other airlines that are not paying employees, neither have they formally let them go. Brazil's Azul SA says it has 78% of its employees on unpaid leave, while about half of Avanza Holdings employees remain unpaid. Meanwhile, Air Canada is laying off approximately 50 to 60% of its employees from June 7th. In a memo sent to all staff, the company said 20,000 employees will be affected by the move. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.